All right, so we are going to talk about the return to the office. If you looked at the agenda, I think I'm supposed to be talking about something like the future of work is more human than you think, but I decided to change it because in the last couple of months, I've been doing quite a bit of research on what we're doing with the return to the office, and I think we're not trying to solve the right problem. Everybody always wants to talk about what's the right number of days should we go back? Is it 3? Is it 4? Is it 5? It doesn't matter. Attrition's still going up. People aren't happy. We need to start changing the way we look at this. But to start off, I want to explain a little bit about who I am and where I work. I work for a company called 8 Inc. And the vast majority of you will have no idea what that is because we're a very small firm, maybe 150 people worldwide. But if you had heard of us, it's probably because our founder was the guy who was approached by Steve Jobs to create this retail store concept called the Apple Store. So we've had people working inside of Apple for 25 years now. We've been doing a lot of stuff around experience design. And we've taken that and we apply it to a bunch of different industries. But what we really focus on doing is we design human experiences and we try to translate that into tangible business outcomes. And we've brought into other industries like retail. So we've just done the new flagship store for Maserati in Milan. We've been transforming experience centers, whether it's for technology vendors or this is Nissan Crossing in Ginza in Tokyo. Here in Australia, we've been transforming digital experiences. We've been working with Bupa to take all of their different apps and pull them together into a single unified app and change that experience. And then we just did one for brands. And I love this one just because I'm selfish and I think the picture looks really cool. We just did the new logo and branding for McLaren for their 60th anniversary. And now some of you are going, so what does that actually have to do with stuff? Well, what we do with all of those different projects is we try to create irrational loyalty. And what we mean by that is, if you think about any company, it's going to have its values. And then it's got the people that it's got to transmit those values to. What we focus on are these 4 different experience realms. So we look at environments, the behaviors that people have, communications, products, and services. And we try to create a unified experience for those people to build this irrational loyalty. You want to know what irrational loyalty is? It's something like this. Why, in today's day and age, when you can sit there and order anything online and get it delivered in minutes, do people queue for days to pick up a new product at the Apple Store? I mean, I don't, but a lot of people do. And they'll do it for days because they're so used to this. It's been years and years of this. It's that bond that they have with Apple. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, I love the new Samsung phones. Like their phones are genius, they're brilliant, but I have all Apple products. And it's been built up over the last 20 something years. I only buy Apple, even though I like other products. So how do you start translating that? And a few of you are probably going, well, what the hell does this actually have to do with the future of office space? Those same concepts we apply to offices as well. But instead of looking at a retail client or a consumer, what we look at are employees. And we recently just did this one, which was BM Suntory's new global headquarters in New York. It's the same concept. That company has values. You want to transmit it down to the employees. So how do you do it not only through the environments of your office space, but how do you look at the products and services, the behaviors that you want to drive, and how do you communicate with them to help them feel more engaged and educated in the workplace? So that's basically what we do. And now we're going to come into the part, which is why Leon, I think, actually invites me down. I'm going to give you a ton of stats. Sometimes people like taking pictures. Don't bother. I'm not precious. I'll share the deck, and I got a lot of slides with stats. Hopefully there'll be a fun thing to go through. So don't worry about taking pictures. I'll give them all away afterwards. And I'll save you from reading the hundreds of pages of reports that I scour through. So what's actually been going on? If you look at where we started a few years ago, pre-pandemic, 3/4 of us were working in the office full time. About 22% were doing it hybrid. And then when you go to the current state where we are right about now, it's about 1/3 of the people are back in the office and about 60% are going hybrid. And what we expect to see throughout the rest of this year is it shifting down even further, where about 18% are full-time in the office and more people will start implementing hybrid. Now, what's interesting about this is that's an amazing amount of transformation. But if you look at it historically, when we do business transformation, digital transformation, operational transformation, we tend to screw it up. We fail at over 60, 70% of our transformations. So we've gone down this path. It doesn't mean we've gone down the right path yet. We still have a long way to go to learn about this. But what's going on in Australia right now? And this just came out the past month, and I find it really interesting because of the variety you get. And a lot of it has to do with what happened during the lockdowns and how strict the lockdowns were. Your office occupancy in Australia now is about 70% in Brisbane, 55% in Sydney, and only 35% in Melbourne, mostly because of the government side. But it is an interesting thing because you're actually doing well above of what you see in a lot of other countries. Some of the major markets in the US right now are only getting to about 50% occupancy. So the numbers you're looking at in two of the bigger cities here, that's quite encouraging. But now I mentioned this before, we asked people to go back to the office and they didn't come back. So now what's happened is we're starting to tell people, what are you going to do? You're going to have to go back to the office 3 days a week. And I love watching this because for me, it's kind of like sport. I like seeing how, I don't want to swear, how ticked off people get when you start forcing them back in. So it started out at 3 days a week, and you got people like Apple, Starbucks, recently Google, Uber, and Amazon have started to push people back in. And they're starting to not say, we're not asking you anymore, we're telling you. Then some of them are going up to 4 days a week now. So you got Snap and Disney. And then you've got the weird ones going 5 days a week. And that's basically the investment bankers and Elon Musk. And he's just like, I don't care, just get back in the office or you're fired. And a lot of people are happy to be fired because they don't want to go back in full time. But it's interesting to watch how they're doing it. Then when we tell them to come in and it doesn't work, we go to the next strategy. We're going to beg. And I loved when this came out. It was from the CEO of Starbucks. And what he said was, and I'll read this so I get it right, I will get down on my knees and do whatever you want to get you back to the office. And I love the fact that we're getting there. But what I also found funny is this came out at the end of January in the news here. And there was this big online debate about it. One of the guys from Atlassian posted it, and I was loving watching people comment on it. And I got to get so I can read this because I know it's a little bit blurry. To be very direct, if you worked in the CBD pre-pandemic, it is time to come back at least 3 or 4 days a week to get the city humming again. That's great. See, you should all go back to the office a lot because it's good for your companies and it's good for the city. But what does that mean for me? Thing is, we're actually missing the point. It's about us, the employees. Give me a reason to come back. I shouldn't do it just because the city needs me or my company needs me. The world has changed. We got to start adapting to this. And what you see is we're forcing people back in and the situation's getting worse. The Great Resignation was a very popular topic a couple of years ago and no one's talking about it and it's still getting worse. And what you see right now is 59% are at least somewhat likely to look for a job in the next 12 months. And that's up 4% from last summer. And this is from Slack's Future Forum. They put out quarterly reports on this, and this is one of the main ones that I track. It's getting worse. And in Australia, it's even worse. So you're looking at almost 2/3 of employees in Australia are at least somewhat likely. Now, most of you will know in your firms, you're probably running it somewhere between about 30% attrition. Sometimes in great industries, you're at 20, but I also know from a lot of the MNCs that I work with across Singapore, some of them are getting closer to 40, and in some lines of business, it hits 60. And a lot of that comes from people who've recently been onboarded. This Great Resignation isn't going away. So while we're over here arguing about how many days in the week we should come in, attrition levels are going through the roof. And look at the impact that has on your financials and your operations. What we need to start doing is focusing more on human outcomes. And I want to explain what I mean by human outcomes because what most companies will do when they run a new initiative is they're going to create a strategy. So let's just say we're talking about, I'm going to launch 5G. So my strategy is I'm going to push 5G out in the market. And then I need tactics. All right, well, how do I convince you that you should buy my 5G? I'm going to tell you it's fast, which no one really cares about because it's already been pretty fast. It's also the same thing we use with 4G and 3G. What they forget is what are the human outcomes? Like what would make me want to buy 5G? Now that's a technology example, but think about it in terms of the office. What nearly every single company around the world did after the pandemic, they said, okay, great. We're going to get employees to return to the office. So that's our strategy. We want them back in the office. And then we come up with these great ideas. We're going to have hybrid work. They'll love that. We'll redesign the office so there's more collaboration spaces. And then we're going to give them free beer because that's going to make everybody want to come back in if they have free beer. Maybe some ping pong tables, beanbag chairs, everything sorted. I'm sure that's what you did at the new JLL office. Yes, exactly. See? Free beer and beanbag chairs. It's all you need and everything's going to work. Thing is, it actually doesn't. When you just do strategy and tactics, it does not guarantee success. Same thing in technology, same thing with future of work, return to the office. We need a new approach and we need to start with the human outcomes. So we've brought people back to the office. What happened during the past year? We have record low employee engagement. Only 21% of people say they're engaged at work. 44% of people surveyed, and by the way, these are all very large surveys from reputable firms. You can see the sources in the bottom. 44% said they experienced stress a lot the previous day. 43% say they feel burned out at work, and this is a brand new survey that just came out. 27% say they're experiencing symptoms of depression, 59% of people reported they're having at least one mental health challenge, and 58% are rethinking work-life balance. So our strategy was we want to bring people back to the office, ask them, then tell them, then beg them, and then we ignore the human outcomes. And this is what's actually been delivered. So when you start wondering, why are people leaving? Because this is how our employees feel right now. And it's not our employees. These are our colleagues, and these are our friends. And what they're saying is, I'm not engaged. I'm stressed. I'm burned out. I'm depressed. My mental health has been impacted, and I'm rethinking my future. So when you want to look at attrition rates, this is the human outcomes that we need to address when we look at bringing people back to the office and encouraging them to want to stay there. So this is the big challenge we face right now. One side note on this, on the feeling burned out at work. Unfortunately, Australia, you win again. You came out the highest at 50% of people say they feel burned out at work, which is not a great thing, but that also leads to the attrition rates. And this is why I'm very comfortable when I say our return to the office strategies have failed. Yes, we've brought people back in, but if they're leaving in record numbers, that's not successful. It's impacting our businesses. Getting them back in the office is not enough. Let's go back to this great resignation. It's still getting worse right now, like I said, and employees are looking for new jobs in the next 12 months. And I just wanted to break those stats down a little bit further for you. You know, the ones that are at least likely to leave, you're looking at a quarter globally and about a third or 30% in Australia. But that next segment, I mean, that's the somewhat likely. This is the ones we can really go after to try and keep them in the offices. This is the opportunity to try and shrink that number down so it's more respectable and it helps you with your attrition rates. But these are damning stats. If you are looking at already 30% and we know it's increasing, that means your 30 can turn into 35. And a little bit later, I'll explain to you more about the financial impact of that. This great resignation isn't just about people getting frustrated and just jumping to the competitor. People are having a great rethink as well. And this was done by McKinsey during the 2 years of the pandemic. And what they found out is for every 100 people who quit their jobs between April 2020 and 2022, 17 did not return to work. A lot of them just said, screw it, I'm done, I'm out of here, time to retire early. 48% decided to switch industries. They wanted to go somewhere where they felt like they would get a better work-life balance. Whether they did or not, who knows? Maybe they're going to come back, but that's what started. That means you're left with only 35% remaining in the same industry. So this creates a real challenge because that creates a talent shortage. You don't have as many people to actually go look for. And the talent shortage we're facing right now is at record levels. So what you see is that from 2010, when they started doing it, it was only 31% of companies found it difficult to source talent. Now, in 2022, it was up at 75%. Now, that's a challenge. That means 3/4 of the companies worldwide are doing that. And again, it's worse in Asia Pacific. Australia's up at over 80%. Singapore and Taiwan are up in the upper 80s. It's a challenging environment. So basically, it's been a bit of a mess. And we have to acknowledge this. The return to work, the return to the office, it's very complex. Everybody's looking for the silver bullet, the one answer that'll explain what we have to do. It's not that easy. You know, look what's going on right now in London. You know, people are basically only going to the office 1.5 days per week. But then in somewhere like Singapore, 75% roughly are going to the office on most days right now. In Hong Kong, it's the exact opposite extreme, and a lot of that was due to the lockdowns, where people just don't want to go back to work at all. So every country has their own nuances. What you see in Australia is every city has its own nuances. Why do you have 35% in Melbourne and then 70% in Brisbane? But then there's the work style preference. And don't read this one. I call this my rainbow vomit slide. Don't try and read it all. I'm going to break it down into some easier bits. If you look at the places where people are most happy to go into the office, the top two, India and Indonesia, that's a lot to do with how people live there. They tend to live in multi-generational homes. They don't have a nice little work area. But the next two down are interesting. It's ANZ. So why is that? Well, people like going out for drinks with their mates after work. They have better work relationships. It's quite positive. So that's why you're actually up in the whole world rankings quite high in this. Now look at the bottom bit here. And this is very interesting because this is the Northeast Asian countries. This is where you get China's 996 work policy, where they just work you to the bone. If you've ever had to do a lot of work in Korea or in Japan, you know how tough that can be. I have, and I know I've been screamed at. Lovely. They still take you out for drinks afterwards, which is very strange. But it's just very much more like that bullying culture. They don't want to go back to work. So you have to start thinking about that. The place where people want to go back to work more than anywhere is the Netherlands. Now, has anybody here worked in the Netherlands before? Okay, there we go. So I had the benefit, I worked there, but I was still in investment banking back in the 90s. So I worked in investment banking in Chicago. Literally 80, 100-hour weeks. They gave me an office, and I kid you not, that had no windows and the door was closed. I mean, I worked in a box building financial models in the 90s before we had Excel. So I was literally building junk. Anyway, my quality of life sucked. I went to go take a job working for investment banking in the Netherlands. They turned the lights off in the building at 8 o'clock. People sat there with newspapers until 9, and everybody would take, and this is the 90s, they'd take their ashtray and put it in the drawer because you couldn't smoke at your desk from 9 to 5. So you had to put it in there from 9 until 5. And then they'd just be reading the newspapers, and then literally 9 to 5 they worked, stop, and pulls up their ashtray, starts smoking it at the desk. And it was the best quality of life. I'm in banking, and I'm literally working 40 hours a week. Picked up a bad smoking habit, but chew nicotine gum, it's okay. But no, that's why people in Holland are willing to go back, because they have that type of a culture. And if you go across Australia, you've got that type of a culture. So people will be willing to come back. You just have to give them a reason to. But you also have to looking within your company, because there's different job profiles. People have different requirements. Sometimes it's more synchronous work where you have to work in a team. So when we work on projects, we bring together people like me, we bring our creatives, our designers, our architects. We'll sit around and brainstorm for a few days. We have to be together. But then it becomes more asynchronous, where it's more like individual contributors. Everybody can go out and do their own work. So sometimes people need to be in, sometimes they don't. In commercial real estate, some of the bigger firms like JLL and CBRE, their brokers are going to be in all the time. But then some other people who work in other areas might only come in a few days a week. So they have different occupancy rates inside of it. So you have to break it down by their work style. And then there's the cost implications. And I love this slide because it's old and it's out of date. It's from the July 2021. Even back then, in London, the average person spent 23 days commuting per year. That equates to about $13,000 in cost, which is 21% of the average salary. That means people, it's not they don't want to go to work, it hurts them financially. Now, in the last 2 years, recession, energy prices going through the roof, pound tanking, it's even worse now. People don't want to go back because it hurts them financially. They can't afford to go back to work. But then you got to think about the relationship we're building. We know we've onboarded a lot of people, but we also know that people are feeling lonelier and have fewer work relationships right now with the hybrid model. So we need to start thinking how we can address that in our workplace. And in addition, business leaders are recognizing this. They know that relationship building in hybrid is the greatest challenge that they face. And I go back to this onboarding one. This is the disaster. If you look at the attrition rates of people that we onboarded during the pandemic, they're leaving in droves. We need to find a way to make them feel more part of the company. And 69% of the business leaders across Asia are concerned that the new hires aren't getting enough support. We've just left them there. And I've seen it again time and time. If you look at all the major companies, those onboarding ones are leaving at about 60% attrition rates. And I won't tell you who the firms are, but it's true. And then, of course, we've got the productivity. Business leaders think that hybrid work has negatively impacted productivity. I don't completely agree with this. When you implement hybrid work, people understand their roles and their jobs are measured based on delivering outcomes instead of hours in the office, your productivity can go up. We're just not there yet because we've just sort of wung it. We haven't treated middle managers fairly because we haven't told them how to manage people in this environment. So basically, we need a new approach. And this is the dilemma that we face right now. Sort of like blue pill, red pill dilemma. We're working in hours-based work. Think about how many companies, 50+% of SMEs in Australia use time tracking software on their employees' laptops to make sure they work between 9 and 5. That's a nice stat for you. But think about this. I don't know about you. Occasionally, I've been known to work outside of 9 to 5. I've done 300 events the last decade. I've never worked on a deck at work. I always work out in the evening on the weekends when I have headspace. But we think that you have to be working. There's a very large tech company where I know somebody reports into a very famous CEO, and they wanted to fire someone because they found out they were watching Netflix on their lunch hour. This is like a C-level in one of the world's biggest technology firms. They want to fire him because he's watching Netflix. The guy works 100 hours a week. If he takes 30 minutes to watch a sitcom and relax for a bit, good on him. We need to flip to this outcomes-based world. And this is not going to be easy because this is generational. All of our job profiles are based on being at the office from 8 to 6, 9 to 6, whatever it might be. It should be outcomes-based. I should know what I have to deliver, and it's up to me to do it in the time I want. And we need to go down this path because basically 81% of desk workers want flexibility of where they work, and 93% want it when they work. And flexibility matters. Those people who are not happy with the flexibility they have at work, 3/4 of them will look for a job in the next 12 months. Let's just put this into perspective, and I'm going to estimate here. Let's say that we're a company and I'm making you come back 5 days a week. That means roughly right about over here and over here, you're all looking for a job. What would that do to any business? But people also want more work-life balance. And what we see is 40%, 48% of people would quit their job if it stopped them from enjoying their lives. And again, I broke this one down just for fun's sake to look at the age groups, but also to see how Australia fares. Your younger generation, Tony, wherever you are, keep this in mind when you start talking to your people. That younger generation wants work-life balance still. So we got to find ways to build that into their job, and that's around job flexibility. We need to stop the rot. Things have been getting worse. It's great that we're all back. We're not locked down during the pandemic. This isn't good for our companies going forward. We need to redefine what we want our companies to be in the future and what cultures we want to have. And basically, we need to acknowledge the return to the office has been a bit of a failure. We asked people to return to the office. We told them to return to the office, and we begged them to return to the office, and it hasn't worked. And it comes down to this: what's in it for me? If I'm the employee, what is in it for me? And people want to know what the key to the future of work is. Key to the future work is giving people a reason to return to the office. If you want to be successful, it's not just about putting in a fancy new office. It's about giving them the reason to want to come back in. Certain things will work in the short term. You need to find things that will make it work in the longer term. So now the big thing. Everyone goes, okay, great. Employee experience sounds nice. But we have a recession. Interest rates are going up. We've got travel freezes. We've got budget freezes. I'm laying off people. Everyone's got the financial excuses. I get it. This is the cost of doing nothing. And this is a very simple model I worked out with the global head of HR at a large MNC. And she says I'm being way, way too conservative on this. You can create this yourself very simply. Take the total number of employees you have, find out what your attrition rate is, and that'll give you the number of employees you need to replace. Give an average salary in there. Replacement cost 50% is very low. It goes up to $250 in your senior management levels, and that'll calculate what your annual attrition cost is. The MNC I was talking to spends over $70 million a year in Asia alone in attrition costs. That's what they're losing. What if you could reduce it by 10%? So just keeping 16 people. That saves you nearly $1 million. 20%, almost $2.5 million. So this is where you can start driving a lot of value. But the challenge we face right now is employee experience doesn't really fit within the office space. It should, but the people who manage the workplace are one group, and then the people who do employee experience tend to be another one. So it's a separate thing, and it hasn't been unified. But what if we took employee experience together with workplace experience and brought them into more of a unified offering to help clients and everybody make the world a better place and make our companies better going forward? Well, that's what we're doing. So going forward, we've just announced a collaboration with JLL. Obviously, they're one of the world's leaders in doing workspaces, and we're one of the leaders in doing employee experience. And we're bringing together this unified offering. And it makes a lot of sense because the stuff that we do, these experience master plans, what we design for the Apples of the world, we do the same thing within offices. And it fits nicely into what JLL does. It's almost like this natural crossover. And what we're seeing is clients are coming in and they're not only asking for workspace anymore, they're asking for experience. And what we actually try to do with this is pretty simple on paper. Brilliant basics. You already are going to build out beautiful new offices for your employees to come in. What we start looking at is what are those augmented offerings that get people to want to come back in, and what are those signature type experiences that make them want to stay. And whether you do it with us or do it on your own, look for these things. You have to find those differentiators that are going to redefine what you want to be in the future, what your company wants to be in the future. And this is the objective of what we're doing. We're taking it to the new level. So normally what you would do is just focus on your environments when you look at the office space. We're saying take your values and start looking at the behaviors you want to drive, the products and services that you launch internally, and how you communicate with your employees to embrace them, make them feel wanted and valued, to educate and engage them, to reverse those statistics I showed you earlier. This is what we're trying to accomplish because this is what we truly believe is needed. So in conclusion, this is where when I do events, they always say, give them 3 points at the end because they always want 3 points at the end, remember. I do that a lot. No one ever listens to me. So I'm not going to do it. Instead, I'm going to follow through the thing I was making fun of earlier. I'm going to beg you to please, can we just please change the narrative? I get asked every week, almost every single day, that people want the silver bullet. How many days should people go back? There isn't a silver bullet. Let's quit talking about these questions and address the fact that attrition's still going up and figure out how we can actually solve that. Because the future of work is going to be employee experience, and the future of work is more human than you think. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you very much for that, Charles. Now, do we have any questions? So no one put any questions into the app, and I'm going to attribute that to your lack of caffeine in the way that you answered both me initially and then Charles.
I think it's an American thing.
That's it. So do we have any questions? We have a couple of roving mics. Does anybody have anything you'd like to ask Charles in an open forum? I know you'll probably want to talk to him afterward.
Come on, part of the fun of coming down to Australia is you guys are so picky about presentations. Someone always challenges me on something.
I'll kick it off with a question.
Okay.
So you talked about, some of these interesting signature experiences to try and get people back into the office. What are a couple of those? Like, give us some little pearls there. Is it, Tai Chi in the morning or what,
Well, funny you mentioned that. It isn't Tai Chi specifically, but a lot of the focus has got to be more on well-being. If you look at the surveys that come out, everybody's been impacted by it. Their health and well-being isn't what it was a few years ago. So we're looking with a couple of clients about how do you implement different types of things. And it could be some types of exercise types things, but it could be access to healthier foods. A lot of what happens in Singapore is people don't have time because we have a harder work culture, I think, than down here. People don't have time to actually go out to the store. So we're working with a couple of partners about how do you actually almost create a little shop that allows you to get access to healthy organic foods in there. Some of the other ones are really silly and so unbelievably simple. It's about how do you leverage your digital signage in your office. And I get ticked off about this. Whenever I walk into an office and they say, "Welcome, Charles," I feel like I'm walking to the airport and the guy's sitting there. It's like, I know I'm here. I don't need this. You've got these screens, which are basically just, you stick a USB in and it runs for a month. The idea is that is a communication and engagement tool. And the area I like looking at it is around sustainability. And don't quote me on the exact numbers on this, but I think it's about 80% of commercial real estate firms across Asia Pacific have implemented fairly rigorous carbon reduction targets. But only 35% of their workforce knows about it. So you've got this huge gap of what they're actually doing, but they're not telling the employees. Yet when you ask the employees what's most important to you and about a place you work, it's about ESG targets and being proud of the place you work. So there's this huge opportunity to make the company understand. You can educate them, and it helps engage them, and they feel proud of the place they work. And that turns them more into an ambassador for your company to help you attract and retain the best talents. Yeah, so it becomes a nice little tool. It's a simple thing. It's just digital signage. We got all these different displays. Get rid of the junk that's on there. Start putting stuff in there to engage with them. Also, for your onboarding, think about all the people who come back in. Why are you not telling more stories in there about the people who work in your company? Help them feel a part of it, because right now, those people you onboarded, they're completely separate.
Excellent. What else? Anyone else? Oh, got one in the back here.
So you just need you to step in
That's
first.
it. It's like priming the pump. Now we're going to have to, cut it short.
Hi. A question around, a lot of statistics you put up around stress and burnout and mental health, and I think that's messaging we've heard before. But I guess for me, I also see more flexibility than we've ever had before. So there's just a disconnect there. So what do you think are some of the drivers? Because work-life balance is surely better than it's ever been.
So my theory on this, and it is a theory because I can't back this on stats. I think that we've just never properly addressed the human impact of the pandemic. I don't think we've shown enough empathy towards people and let them understand what they are. I know I am a very different person than I was 3 years ago. And I don't fully understand what I am yet. I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to be as it goes forward. This isn't the new normal. This isn't the next normal. This is a transition phase. And it's going to go on for quite a few years. And people are trying to figure out what they really want, what's important to them in a workplace, in an employer, in a work style. Sometimes they might sit there and go, I want to work from home all the time, but then they realize they really don't want to do that. Sometimes they might come in 5 days and I don't want to do that. So it's going to be a period, and the bad news is I don't see it ending anytime soon. It's going to be a period of transition where you've got to be a lot more flexible. That means you should be surveying not once a year to do your employee experience. You should be doing it quarterly to find out what's going on and find out what are the drivers. You mentioned sort of the well-being side of it, what's working and what isn't working. Go deeper. Don't just take the normal standardized surveys. Go to that next level down. And I'm not a survey organization, so I'm not telling you that we can do this for you. We have to start looking at it and really understanding it, because as of right now, what we've tried to do is to say, okay, everything's going to go back to normal. We're not ready for that. And I don't think the people are yet either.
My question's about connection. As humans, we all want to feel connected, sense of purpose. I was looking at some data last night, and it related to one of your slides across the generations, because it was talking about the fact that younger generations coming back into the office are feeling that sense of connection. You know, it's that's working for them, but older generations are not. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Definitely the younger generations needs that bonding more, because you got to remember how you think about how all of us felt when we got out of uni. We spent a lot more time with our friends. As you get older, you start a family, you don't have as much time, you tend to have less and less engagement. That younger generation is very important. And I will just say anecdotally, because Tony and I were talking about this earlier, if you go back 30 years ago when I was coming out of uni and I came into this environment, I never would have left Chicago. I would have been able to work in a hybrid mode. I wouldn't have found the right mentors or whatever else. I wouldn't have the bonds that eventually got me to push me to initially move to the Netherlands and then to London and then Singapore. And I think it's very important for that younger generation. And I was talking to someone yesterday, is that in their company, what they've done is they've assigned somebody from that Gen Z to all of senior management to basically start explaining to them, this is what we're seeing in our age group. So it's not just old gits like us going out there going, this is what it is.
Yourself, man. Come
Okay, I got a few more years on you, right? But yeah, it's really to understand what they're going through, because it's a very different world. And I mean, I'll be honest with you, I struggle with a lot of the stuff that goes on today. I look at Instagram and I get confused the hell out of me and death scrolling. But this younger generation, we have to make sure that we're understanding what they want and how they want to work. And then we need to start adapting it, which is why a one-size-fits-all strategy for return to the office does not work. You got to break it down by age. You got to break it down by job profiles, by country, by city, whatever it could be.
Probably got time for one more question.
More data than all of that.
Sorry.
How long do you want me to go? I've got it. I can go all day. Leon would get really pissed
No, just
off.
talking about attrition rates, right?
Yeah.
I remember reading a few studies about this experiment about companies going to a 4-day week.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's more data supporting perhaps that kind of hybrid model, surrounding that. And in that experiment, they reported far less burnout and far less stress.
Yeah, you get that. So there's been some companies in Japan have done it. They've been doing it in Dubai. They've gone to a 4.5-day week. And the 4.5-day one seems to work really well. People like that one. The 4-day week, I'm not convinced, because especially in somewhere like Japan, with the toxic cultures they have, you can do 4-day weeks, which just means you still work Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but you do it from home. And it also depends on the job profile, the industry that it's in. I like, and we always want to go back to the number of days. If we switched it to outcomes, and like I've had the benefit of basically working as an individual contributor for 20 plus years. I've normally worked from home. I have to deliver. So I know what it is. That's why someone's going to pay me and employ me. So as long as I keep doing that, I do it in my own time. That means that I don't always work 9 to 6. I take breaks. Friday afternoons, I like having time for myself, but I always know I can crank out some work on a Saturday morning or a Sunday morning. And I build in the flexibility that works for me. If we switch this whole base around from being hours-based to outcomes-based, people can define it for themselves. Telling them it's 4 might sound great, but somebody might actually prefer to do 5, but then less every day instead of having the 10. So we need that flexibility, and we're just not structured right now to deliver that.
Guys, that's it for time. Can I have a big hand for Charles?
Thanks, Ray.
Good job, buddy.